paid $400 for this because it claimed to have one feature that my Makita track saw doesn't have. And that feature turned out to be a massive failure and disappointment on Ryobi's part. In this video, I'm gonna share 10 things I hate about this Ryobi track saw, what the major disappointment is, and after all of that, with a straight face, despite roasting the saw, I'm gonna share how I think for some people, most of those things probably won't matter, and for one reason, Ryobi will sell a ton of these saws, even to some of you. One of the biggest problems with this track saw is the track. They went with a proprietary design. You know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? For the life of me, I can't figure out why Ryobi went with a different design. With Makita and Festool, Win, PowerTech, even the new Milwaukee track saw all use the same track saw design, which means you can mix and match and you can upgrade to different saws and keep your tracks if you want to do that. But with Ryobi, you can't do that. If they had used the standard guide rail system, I could see people buying in at this lower price and then maybe upgrading their saw to something like Milwaukee or Makita or Festool, but keeping all their tracks they're invested in. Major con of this track. Now, how can you make a proprietary track worse? Make it a split track. To my knowledge, Ryobi is the only company to make a 55-inch track that needs to be spliced together. One of the main reasons you want a track saw is for accuracy and ease of use. And when you have to join two tracks together, you're introducing the possibility of being out of square or inaccurate, and few things worse than gliding across a workpiece and then hitting a bump because of where the two tracks meet. Big issue. What I will say about it that's kind of nice is it's really portable and you can move your track saw pretty easily, say in a car. But if they had portability in mind, then why didn't they include a case for the track or the track saw? But that's coming up later on the list. I'm getting ahead of myself. The third thing I hate is the rubber splinter guard. It's pretty low quality. As you can see here, it's already cracked and split, almost like it was dry. And I've had my Makita track saw for I think 3 years now, and I've never had my splinter guard crack and rip like this. Now, of course, you can get replacements, but right out of the box that it's doing this, big quality problem. This is just dumb. Because they use a proprietary design, you have to use their clamp to clamp your pieces together. Not only does it ruin your upgrade potential, say if you use the popular ratchet style clamps, you can keep those despite what track you use. It's really Fisher-Price looking, and I don't like it at all. And there's only one. I mean, why not include two? Oh, because it's Ryobi. There's no case. I think on the cheaper track saws, that's common to not get a case, but even when you buy the Craig track saw for $299, you get a soft case with it. I think that's one of the great things about Makita is for a little bit more money, you get a hard sustainer case that plays nice and is compatible with Festool stuff. This isn't a huge deal as probably most Ryobi users are working at home and in their garage, and they are probably not moving their tools around. But given the fact that you can spend less money or a little bit more money on the Craig or the Makita and still get a case, makes me scratch my head why Ryobi didn't include some type of a case that's not styrofoam with their saw. The dust port is awful. It's not a standard size, and so it doesn't use my Festool hose. The Syntec hose that I have does fit into it, and if you have any of Ryobi's battery-powered vacuums, those fit inside of it. But I was a little bummed that this doesn't fit with my dust extractor hose, but then again, who's using a $700 Festool dust extractor with a Ryobi track saw? I mean, an idiot. On most other track saws, the dust port pivots and has kind of a 45-degree angle, and you can shoot the dust away from you. But when you're using this and you're not using dust collection, the sawdust is shooting right at you. At least on my Makita, I can angle it away from me. Also, the dust collection sucks, and not in the way that you want dust collection to suck. It actually sucks, meaning that it doesn't suck. That makes sense. While using a vacuum, I'd say it probably got 70% of the sawdust, but there was still a mess. I designed and 3D printed a cap that goes on the arbor cover, and that helped a lot, but I'd say there's still maybe 10% of sawdust that was still escaping, and I don't have that problem on my other track saws. The build quality. The thing's mostly plastic with the exception of like the very center of it is metal. The base is plastic, I think probably ABS. Everything else is plastic. And the big surprise was this outer side cover is plastic. It's the only track saw that I've used and touched that is plastic. All the other track saws I've used have metal outside surroundings. This one's kind of picky. The plunge depth guide is really janky. It has these teeth that help you kind of lock in the position, but that makes adjusting the depth very, very difficult. Riding a bike with a rusty chain, it's just real jaggedy. And on the other track saws I've used, those glide really nicely. It's not a big deal, but it's one of those things that when you're using it, you're like, man, I wish this was better. And the 10th thing I hate about this track saw, which is the biggest disappointment, and the reason why I bought it, was that it has a riving knife. When I first saw the press release for the saw, I decided I was gonna buy the saw for this reason alone, because the Makita doesn't have a riving knife. And I get this question all the time from people asking, does the Makita have a riving knife? Do I need a riving knife? I don't necessarily use a riving knife in my track saws. I cut mostly plywood, and I think if you're cutting plywood, you should be cutting stable enough material where you wouldn't need a riving knife to prevent kickback. However, if you're gonna include it, why not have it? But there's a big problem. It's fixed, meaning that when you go to cut, the bottom of the riving knife is sticking below the blade, which means you can't plunge cut. What's another name for a track saw? A plunge saw. So if you're cutting materials, you would have to start the saw off of the material and glide into it to be able to use the riving knife. Not a deal breaker, but if you forget that you have to do that, you could run into a problem if you're trying to plunge into a workpiece and the riving knife is hitting it. The Craig track saw is $2.99 and it has a riving knife, but it has some type of a spring mechanism to where it plunges down to its depth after you make the plunge cut. I believe Festool is the same way. I think Milwaukee does that too. Now the good news is that it's easy to remove and it's easy to put back in, but it's a hassle, and I would have vastly preferred that it's built in and plunges automatically when you need it. Okay, I'm being really hard on the saw and really picky. There's 3 things I do like about it. The first is that it's actually pretty accurate. It does the job. If you're looking for a cheap track saw to cut on your line, do minimal measurement, and do its job, it adjusts to the track really nice. I was able to get it to where it doesn't have any slop and it's perfect, which was a big surprise to me. The profile of the saw is actually really good. It's pretty slim and compact, similar to the 40 volt Makita. The one thing I don't like about the 36 volt Makita that uses the 2 18 volt batteries is it's kind of bulky. This saw is nice and slim, and I think the profile and the mass of the saw is spot on. It's a really good thing. The number one thing about this saw that I think Ryobi has nailed and is brilliant in is the battery platform. There's not another tool manufacturer out there that I know of that is able to get the most out of one battery, and these are 18 volts. Now, I'm not a Ryobi fanboy. If you know me, you watch the channel, I'm a Makita man. I'm Team Teal all the way, and I dabble with Festool. But for most homeowners and most DIY people, this is hard to beat. If you buy the saw with the battery, it comes with a 4 amp hour high performance battery, and it lasts quite a long time, and I'm really, really impressed with this. Who is this track saw for? Well, if you're a pro, then you already know the answer. The answer is no. I would not invest in this if I was making money with it. You can spend a little bit more money and get something like the Makita and have a much better product, have a higher ease of use, and frankly, get more joy out of it. And I think it's way more durable for just a little bit more money. If you're a tool snob like me and this is your passion and your hobby, and you don't mind spending money on things like Milwaukee and Makita and Festool and SawStop and things like that, then you already know the answer. You probably wouldn't be happy with the saw because the fit and finish and the quality and your interaction with it is not going to be at the level that you would get with Festool or Makita or Milwaukee. But here's where Ryobi's smart. They're not targeting me, they're not targeting pros, they're not targeting tool snobs. They're targeting the average homeowner or the DIY person or the person who's getting into woodworking and doesn't have a whole lot of money to spend and has to use their budget wisely. They are perfectly positioned to reach that market, especially when you consider you can invest in one battery line and then just buy the tool only options as you need them. And if that's you, there's no shame in that. When I got started 15 years ago, I bought a circular saw and a straight edge, and I hated woodworking because it was really hard to get good cuts off of sheet goods. And I wish this thing was around back when I got started 15 years ago, because I would have spent a little bit more money and got this track saw, and my woodworking journey would have been way different. I would have had more fun faster, and I would have had better outcomes and higher accuracy projects, and I would have been safer doing all those things. So if you're just getting started, or you're beginning to build out your tool collection, or you're still wondering if this is even a hobby you like, there's no shame in buying Ryobi. Just know probably eventually you're going to want to graduate to something a little nicer and a little better as you learn what you like. To be completely honest with you, despite all the things that I hate about the saw and me roasting it, most of you probably wouldn't notice those things if you're not kind of an all-in tool snob like me or a professional. For most people who are going to be looking at Ryobi anyway, you would probably like this and it would work for you. And again, there's no shame in that. Now, if you end up getting the saw, I've developed some 3D printed accessories for the saw, for the track, and there's a link to my Etsy store below with a discount code if you want to check that out. For so long, track saws were out of the range for most woodworkers. You had to spend a lot of money to get this niche tool. And if you already have Ryobi batteries, you can get a decent B- track saw for 300 bucks. And surprisingly, you can actually build quality stuff with this if you have the skills. I went on a road trip recently and I built a custom bathroom vanity out of maple plywood for my sister, and she helped me, and I was really surprised by the results that we got. My sister even got in on the action and started using the saw herself. She'd never used a track saw, much less heard of one. She didn't know anything about them. And within 15 seconds, I showed her how to use it, and she was cutting accurate pieces safely. And she has a lot of Ryobi things already. She's the perfect market for this. Now, while I'm not the biggest Ryobi fan, and sure, the quality isn't there for what I would want, I'm really impressed with what Ryobi's done here with their battery line, with them bringing a saw like this to market for the price point. Ryobi is introducing a track saw to a market that probably doesn't know what a track saw is or wouldn't have the money to invest in a $900 track saw. And even though I don't love the saw, they're helping people make things more accurately, safer, with a tool they didn't know much about. And for that reason, I think Ryobi is actually genius. I see you, Ryobi.
Unique, New York. Unique, New York. Drew, I think Ryobi is not really going to want to sponsor this video, or any for that matter. So maybe back off on this one.